Hi there, nice to see you again. Today we'll be looking at this painting of Bluebell woods. Lovely spring picture, nice bluebell woods. These are the woods at the end of my road. And don't forget you can download the instruction sheet as well. And no cheat for this one because there's not much drawing involved with it. We just go for it. Right, okay, let's get going. Okay, so we're going to look at painting this lovely spring bluebell scene. Bluebells are a magical colour and they're just that vibrant colour. They're beautiful. They only last for a month or so. And this is a little wood at the end of my road here, Millison's Wood, which is a beautiful spring bluebells in there. So first of all, we just need to give ourselves an idea of where the horizon line is going to be. So you only want it about a third of the way up. So about a third of the way up your picture. You usually have the horizon line either 2/3 or a third of the way up your picture. So somewhere about a third of the way up. And if you just slightly sag it in the middle, so it comes just slightly lower in the middle than it does on the side, it becomes a happy picture. If you sag it the other way, your eye, it looks like it's drooping down at the sides, but that makes it almost like a smiley face into it there. I'm just going to put a hint of where I want a couple of the trees, the main trees. They're going to come in front of the horizon, and then you just have some branches coming off here. And then this is a nice big oak tree. It's funny, every year I go up and take pictures of these bluebells, and every year it's always different because it depends on how the spring's been, as what the weather's like, what time, on how green the leaves are. You either get them very green if they've come out early, or if they've come out a bit later, then you'll get the brighter spring greens to them. It's quite strange. I'll put another little tree here. Normally you don't have two, you'd have 3 trees, but I think this looks quite nice with just a couple of them. Perhaps I'll have 2 close together here to give me my odd number of trees, and then a few branches coming off. That's all I need to draw. Might want to put a little hint of the pathway, sort of wiggling its way off into the distance there, getting wider as it comes forward and narrower as it goes away into the distance. So then we're going to mix all the colours up that we're going to use into this picture. And the colours of the bluebells, ultramarine blue, or cobalt blue, either of those, ultramarine blue. So I'm going to mix a puddle of that up. I've mixed those up here previously. So ultramarine blue and a touch of alizarin crimson, just only a touch, just to give it a little bit of a pinky purpley colour to it. You want the colour for the trees, which would be bright lemon yellow or a cadmium yellow pale hue. Or we want a cadmium yellow as well. I haven't mixed that one up. Let me just mix that one up for you as well, so it's ready and waiting. Then you start to mix some of the greens. Lemon yellow and ultramarine blue gives you a very limey, bright green. And eventually we'll have some darker greens with cadmium yellow and ultramarine blue to give you some darker greens as well eventually, but we'll just stick to those at the moment. And then just a little bit of burnt sienna for the pathway. So now we're going to do this in stages. We're going to put one layer on all over. This is like your undercoat to it. So we're going to keep this nice and soft. We're going to wet this all over. So I'm using my mop brush, which is just a soft brush to wet the paper with. So you can wet it all over. You go whichever direction you like to wet the paper. You just have a bit more control when you come to put the paint on. So we're going to wet this all over, top to bottom. If you move your head around, you can see where it's dry and where it's sitting in puddles. So we just keep it moving around. I like to use Bockingford paper. I think this is the 300 gram weight. I usually prefer the 425 gram weight because it doesn't cockle quite so much as this does. But this should be all right for this little picture here. There we go. Right, so that's wet. Big brush, or biggish brush. This is something like a 12 round, I think, something like that. And then we're going to go in with the lighter colours first. We're going to put the little patches of the yellows into the background here, just to give you some shapes of the foliage. We're going to make this a bit more intense a bit later on and build it up with a bit more colour a bit later on. So we're just putting in the first layers of that. So a bit of lemon yellow into the background. Leave some areas without paint on. Leave some areas white. Perhaps a bit of the other yellow as well. And then we'll have a bit of the greens up here to give me some depth into this, a bit more greens along this edge here. just to give me a little bit of the background. And then we'll start to build up. That's just putting on shapes of trees really into, or shapes of branches there. And then we'll start to come forwards with the bluey colours now. So we're going to put on some bands of blue going across here. So I'm forgetting the trees are there at the moment. We're just working across with some bands of blue for the bluebell woods at the background here. And then perhaps a band of the different shade of the blue with a touch of alizarin crimson into it. Just clean my brush a minute. I might just put the little path in so I can see where to stop and start on this one. Just putting that in, wiggling that back so we can build it up as we're going along. We want a band or two of green in between there because that gives you a nice contrast between the blues here. So some of the greens there, the bright lemony greens there, and then keep going with some more blue. Just have little patches of that, more purpley blues and things into it as well, and do the same on the other side, a bit more of the blues down here. It's just starting to dry out, drying really quickly. We do have a bit of sunshine here at the moment before the next wave of snow is due to arrive, I think. But so it's drying everything out quite quickly. And that's it for my first coat. I'm just going to let it dry out now, and then we'll build it up a bit more. Right, what I should have done before I dried it was just to lift out these tree trunks here a little bit. So you don't have to worry too much about it, just the main part of the tree trunk. So if I'd gone straight into that while it was still wet with a clean dry brush, I could have just lifted it out more easily, but as it's dried a little, I just have to dampen that and just rub it slightly just to lift out some of the tree trunks to leave them a little bit lighter. Although we're going to paint back into it, you want some areas which are going to be a little bit lighter on the tree trunk, and it helps you to see where you're going a bit as well. So you can just do that, just rub your brush over it and it should just lift back out again. Right, now we need to put some depth into this picture. So just making sure that's dry again. So we want to put some background trees in here. So I'm going to mix up a puddle of ultramarine blue and cadmium yellow, quite a strong bluey green colour. And this time we're going to turn the board upside down, tilt it a little bit. So it's quite tilted now. So now I'm going to re-wet this. Now it has to be bone dry before you can do this. So I've just dried it with a hairdryer a little bit. And I'm just re-wetting this top part again. Just right down off the paper. So this is all over the tree area. So it's gone off the paper here, making sure it's an even coating of water so there's no puddles in it. And again, off the paper. I'm just going to dry that a little bit because it is very wet up there. Just take a little bit of that out. So if that's completely dry, it shouldn't disturb what you've got put on there before. Little brush now, smaller brush. And we're just going to pop on a few little splodges of the dark green here, up to that tree trunk and away again. And this should naturally just very gradually creep up your picture, and hopefully it'll give you the effect of some distant trees as if they're growing into the background there. So just bringing those up to the other tree trunk, just let them grow. Just see how it's just naturally, if your board's tilted, it will flow away from the picture there. So this is just giving you a horizon line and hopefully a bit more depth into the picture before we go too much further onto it. Just a few more trees here. Just encourage it to go up a little bit into that one. And then when you think they've crept up far enough, you can just, again, just dry your brush. Just dry your brush in a bit of kitchen roll or tissue or something like that, and just keep lifting those out so you don't lose your tree trunks into it. You can lift out a few more distant ones as well if you want to. Just bring up a few for the little fine ones which will come up into the background here, just with your little brush. And again, we're going to just dry it in a moment, just to make sure that's all nice and completely dry. Okay, so I'll just turn it round again so you can see what it looks like. There we go, our little trees. It looks like a little forest already in the background there. Very easily done. It just let it do its own thing. So I'm just going to dry it again with the hairdryer, and then we'll move on to the next stage. Okay, this is reasonably dry now, so we can start putting some leaves on the trees. And I'm going to use a sponge for this. A lot of people say they don't get on with sponging very well, and it's probably because they haven't conditioned the sponge to work properly, or the wrong sort of sponge. You need a natural sponge, and you want something with a coarse texture to it, something with a rough texture to it. So when you first get the sponge out, it's usually very dry. So what you have to do with that to get it to be bouncy and flexible is to put it in water, and then you work it, and you'll feel it changes from hard to soft and bouncy. And then you squeeze out as much water as possible, squeeze it again, so you can't get any more water out of it. So that's now ready to use. The sponge is now ready to use. It's all nice and bouncy now. And I might even go to the point of drying it on it again even more, so it's on a bit of tissue. It's a nice coarse textured sponge. It's nice and bouncy. So we're going to start with the lighter colours first. I'm going to dip it in to my yellow here, quite a strong mix of yellow. Get as much onto your sponge as possible. Don't screw the sponge up so it's a little lumpy. Keep it quite loose, and it's going to be a light touch onto the paper. So just a little light touch. We can start to put some of the leaves on the trees. Don't keep going and going and going in the same place, otherwise it tends to flatten out. And occasionally turn your sponge so you get a different patterning to it. Bring them down quite low. Let's put a few more on this side as well. And then we'll swap colours. We'll have a bit of the other yellow, the more cadmium yellow, into that. And then into that we'll have a little bit of the greens. Don't bother cleaning the sponge in between this. I just go straight in, so you're gradually getting darker with the colours. And you can always put a bit more sponging on afterwards, after we've done a bit more work to it, if you need to. But you want a fair bit on there to start with, but you need to leave some gaps in between it, because that's where we're going to put the branches eventually. So we're just putting these arcs of branches coming across here, so arches of leaves coming across, just to give you some texture and some form into it. We can use a sponge to put a little bit of this texture onto the foreground as well. Don't do it on the back third of the foreground, just do it from this bit forwards. So we just have a little bit of the sponging of the greens just onto where the leaves are just overlapping or the grass and stuff is just overlapping the foreground here. You can even do a little flick if you wanted to, right at the very foreground, which again gives you a slightly different effect and gives you some more texture into it. Let's get a little bit of a stronger dark green now. Just mix up a bit more ultramarine blue and cadmium yellow, just to give me a little bit more colour, because one thing the sponge does, it immediately soaks up all the paint you've got mixed up, but you think you've got a big puddle of it, and it all disappears as soon as you put the sponge in. So I'm just flicking up some slightly stronger, darker greens, a little bit of speckling across the back here, and a little bit of the darker. Flick it up a little way and you get grasses. And again, just dots towards the back there. And a little bit of dots up there. But not too far back with the sponging. I'm just going to clean it now because I'm going to go into the blues. So I do clean it, squeeze it out. Make sure it's nice and dry. So into the ultramarine blue now. And again, a little bit of sponging in bands, in lines, not towards the back, just in the foreground area. And this hopefully should look like little patches of shimmering bluebells. And let's get some of the other colour as well into that. The ultramarine blue and a touch of alizarin crimson. When you're doing sponging, don't keep going over and over the same spot, because otherwise it tends to flatten all the texture and all the patterning out, so you can't see any difference to it. It just tends to make it go too smooth. Just a little bit up here by that tree, and then leave the back bit to go back into the distance. There, I think that'll do for those. So that's a nice bit of effect onto those. It works really well, this does. Very effective little way of working them. So now the tree trunks, we're going to put the tree trunks into this. So now all this part's dry, we can just mix up some colours for the tree trunks. So you want a bit of the green again for the moss and the stuff that's on the tree trunks there. So don't just grab a brown, make a bit of greeny colour, and also you want a bit of burnt umber, dark brown and ultramarine blue, which give you a browny grey colour. Because trees aren't just a brown colour, they are sort of greys and things like that. So with the tree trunks, we're going to leave some areas without paint on, so decide which side. Perhaps this is the lighter side and that's the darker side of the tree. So we're going to add it in little areas here. So perhaps start with a bit of the green, adding some of the green onto it, leaving it slightly lighter on to one side, and then we'll have a bit of the darker colour. Let's pop that in straight away into it in some places so it gets darker on the right hand side. Don't flare the bottom of the tree trunk out. We don't volcano trees. The tree trunks are only very short down the bottom here. And then gradually we can take this up into the where your sponging is, and in some places you just work the little trunks or the little branches in between these patches of sponging. So where you haven't, or where you've left a little bit of a gap, you can dot it in between that bit of sponging, and it will gradually build up and put the tree trunks into it. This is where you might need to every now and again stand up and have a look at your picture to make sure that your branches are following through, because it's quite easy to suddenly put half a branch here, then the branch doesn't follow through at the other side of the clump of sponging. So just make sure it just comes up, dot it back into your little bits of where the sponging was or wasn't, stop every time you get to a bit of sponging, and then gradually build this up. These tree trunks will get thinner and thinner and narrower as they come towards the top, or they'll split gradually into little twiggy bits as they come up the tree. And then you can just do some little fine bits towards the end here. Just use the tip of your brush and just put some little branches in towards the end. Perhaps that needs another little branch coming off the side here. And then some little bits up the top here. Again, just split it down into little tree trunks as they come up, off and away. And gradually building up this. Get them a little bit fainter as they, a little bit weaker with the paint as you come to do these branches. You don't want it as dark as the main tree trunk here. So little bits of twigs coming up and away into the main. That's one. Don't like that. I'm just going to take that out a little bit there, and then dotting a bit more up the front there. So that's one tree in. I'll do the same with these. Try and get some different colours into the tree trunk. Lighter on one side, so a bit of the greens on here, then in with the darker paint to the other side, and then bring it down in between your bits of bluebells down the bottom here. Perhaps start to put a branch coming up the tree here, then gradually build this up. And the same sort of thing, just working bits of branches in between your bits of sponging that you've got here, and then just think there'll probably be another one splitting off the main trunk. You'll get another bit of a trunk coming out somewhere there until eventually it'll come out. Perhaps it'll come out into the background here. And again, so just plenty of little, maybe that's a bit darker, bits coming up. You can get one tree crossing another. Let them just, the paint dry out as you come up the tree, so it gets a little bit paler as you come up here into your little twiggy bits. And again, this one coming across here. So we'll do another little tree trunk behind here, because I've left a white patch there, so we'll need to have a little bit of a tree trunk on it. So a bit of the green onto the one side and the darker browny grey to the other side. Wiggle it backwards and forwards a bit so it blends in a bit, and then it can go up into the background here. So these, make sure when you're doing these trees they are in front of the horizon line, so because they're the foreground trees, so they come in the front here, so just in front of everything. So a few more twigs onto this one. Put as many of those on as you like, really. That'll probably do it for those trees. So you can always put a bit more sponging on if you think you need it at this stage. I'll just put some weaker grey now, just for a few little twiggy bits at the back. So just a few little twigs and to give it a bit more depth, and just getting in one or two little bits here so they come into the foreground a little way to give you the sense of that it is a woodland, but keep these nice and weak so you can barely see them really. There's little bits of twigs and branches and things into the background now. So I think that's pretty well there. What we want to do is just put some shadows coming across the picture and make it look like the sun's coming out. And all we're going to do with that is just some ultramarine blue. If you want to put just a tiny weeny touch of burnt umber to it to make it just a little bit more grey, you can do, just to take the edge off it a little bit so it's not quite so bright with the blue. And again, onto the dry paper now. We're just going to bring some of these across from the tree. So you start where your tree is here and just bring it across the picture. Just break it up as it comes in. So it's horizontally across the picture here. That tends to make it look like it's little shadows and little, I think there's little leaves and things, little branches coming across there. So from the base of the tree across. The same with those, you'll just have some little shadows coming across the foreground bit. Again, when it starts splitting into little bits of the foliage at the back there. And perhaps we'll have another shadow, as if there's another tree here coming across from the other side. And we'll have this coming across the path. And perhaps because it's woodland, there'll be lots of these trees, so you can put plenty of those on. Coming across the path here just to give you the effect of the shadows and make it look like it's a sunny day. I think we'll have a little streak of that in the background there as well to give you some different patches of light and dark into the background, so it's not too regular. It's pretty well there. I think all we want to do is just a few dots of extra dots of the blues for the flowers down here, just some nice strong blues, just to emphasise those a little bit more. So it is bluebells, it's right at the front here. We just put a few little bits only at the front. We don't need to do it all the way across, just to reinforce the fact that it is a bluebell wood and just add a bit more brightness to the front of the picture, so you got a little bit more contrast. And you can even put few little dots of perhaps alizarin crimson, so you've got the little red flowers and things like that into it, or a few little extra bits just round by the pathway, so that helps to draw your eye into the picture. And that's it. That's all there is to it.